I am almost excited about this, which is kind of unusual because I've taught Kant on and off for 20 years or something. Slightly more. I'm a vampire, actually. Anyway, and I think that for me, the thing that I find rewarding about reading Kant over and over and over again is that there's always something oddly and refreshingly contemporary about his work. And one of the things that I find compelling about going through it with fresh eyes and not from a position of what you think it should or shouldn't work is that one begins to have a different take, or I hope that one of the things that will come out of this this next exciting next 5 weeks is a different take on what it means to think in the so-called sensuous way. There's a lot of variations on how one interprets the use and abuse of Kant. Usually the words that are associated with the Kantian move is the main one is the sublime, which I don't really want anyone to mention that word until we're at least 2 weeks into Kant, because the use and abuse of that word alone is enough to like make one very upset. So another word that people associate with Kant is experience. Another phrase that people associate with Kant is radical autonomy. Another one is the ethical community. There's different variations on this. So sometimes when you go through the works of those that have come after Kant and so on, so including Hegel, is that you find that there's a kind of dividing position. Either you fall into the camp of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. It's kind of the same division. On the one hand, it's rock and roll, and on the other hand, it's either the Beatles or it's the Rolling Stones. And that kind of positioning that people tend to bring to the fore. Similarly, Kant versus Hegel. If you remember with the Hegelian move, the thing that is very, it's very beautiful about Hegel is that he is able to think through a logic and a kind of introduction, a move into thinking about logic that requires one to be in a system and nothing extraneous to that system. So it's very elegant. But Kant has sort of 1.5 systems. It's like there's the systems that create the ways of thinking, systems of knowledge, systems plural, and these systems that begin to take on a kind of rhythm or a pattern that bring in things like the a priori synthetic unity. A priori synthetic unity. Just a word, a phrase that now you need to just sort of roll around the back of your tongue. Or the notion of the will. He privileges these environments, these whether or not we call them senses or we call them, I don't know, some form of logic. He privileges them in a way that science and scientific logic doesn't tend to talk about the will. It tends to make something sound that's sounding too emotional, or it's sounding too not able to be graded enough and able to be focused enough, this kind of thing. So it's something that you need to bear in mind. He's taking this notion of the will, and in his earlier work, in fact, I think that we were looking at some of it, or I was hoping the prolegomma to the metaphysics, where he actually explains how the will forms the basis, forms the ground to any truth. That's an interesting move. That's an interesting position. It's not so much that he goes to the groundless, the famous groundless ground. I feel like we're kind of working backward to this kind of thing. he basically is explaining, he's basically taking as a given this thing that doesn't really get named very well. Now, people as diverse as Marx, and Gramsci, Gentile is a fascist, pull on Kant. Obviously, there's comments about Duchamp, you know, Terry Dudu's book, Duchamp after Kant, or Kant after Duchamp, sorry, and so on. What, you could even make the argument that people as diverse as Rousseau and John Locke take on this notion of the will as the foundation of society. As long as there is a general will that also allows for particular wills to survive, you've got a society that can function in a way that's not cruel. I mean, the notion of these self-interested positions in what's happening in the world today, these get muted and they become a different form of clay, a different form of an ingredient to the social, to the aesthetic, and so on. So I want you to get a sense that when we move into Kant, we move with, I think you should move very gently and slowly, just like you've been doing with Leibniz. Try not to devour it all in one go, like, I need to understand it. It's very tiny bits that come in. And we're going to start looking at them carefully today. We're going to start with this. Now, before I get into a bigger discussion about this, what are people's basic views of Kant? What do you know of Kant? What do you know of Kant? Nothing. Nothing at all, really.
No.
Okay, fair enough. What do you know of Kant?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I should know a bit because we did a couple of weeks before Easter. So yeah, it's not
Nothing.
Sublime. Yeah, it's those
Okay.
words.
Okay.
Categorical imperative.
Categorical imperative, good one. Yeah. And what is the categorical imperative?
I think it might be to do with monads.
Oh no! Going to kill myself. No. But that's a good guess. Anybody want to take a guess at, except for Mark? Because that's not a guess, is it? Anybody? Well, okay. Let's just put a category.
Sublime.
What's that?
I know not that it's sublime, but it was the dynamical sublime which was interesting.
Yeah, the dynamical sublime. Okay. Anybody else have any word associations with Kant?
Nomina?
Nomina. Good.
A transformation.
Transformation. Yep. Absolutely.
Metaphysics.
Yeah.
It's the battlefield, calls it.
What's it called?
He calls it the battlefield.
Oh, the battlefield. Yeah, I thought you said the Speckles field. I don't remember that. Yeah, no, battlefield. Yes, absolutely. Aesthetics. So do you remember his main books that he's come up with? Anybody know those?
Three critiques.
The three critiques. Can you name them?
Critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, critique of judgment.
Excellent. Right. And which one has more to do with art?
Critique of judgment.
Okay, and why is that?
1790. Because it tries to develop how does one deal with art when it doesn't fit into understanding it, that it's something that can't be broken down. It needs to develop a different sort of teleology.
Okay, good. But a teleology is required. Okay, good. So telos is going to come back into frame. Yeah.
To me, the most important concept in Kant is the notion of transcendental.
Okay.
Because it changes entirely the relationship with reality.
Who's been in our office? Okay, so One was the categorical imperative. One was a priori synthetic unity. Transcendentalism, so transcendental. Dynamical line. Dan, what did you say? Did something with TLS? What was it?
Teleology of
Anything else?
It talks about the distinction between the analytical and
Good.
synthetic.
Analytical.
Analytic and the synthetic.
And then I would add to transcendental the interpretation of infinity.
What is it?
The interpretation of infinity. That's indirect relation to time.
Okay, Mark, your turn.
To name something.
Yeah.
Ooh. Technique.
Oh, good. Technique or technique?
Technique. T-E-C-H-N-I-C.
Yeah. Anybody else want to give it another go?
he developed a dialectic, doesn't he?
Let's talk about dialectics. Okay, and there's also the radical autonomy. There's the will.
So you talk about desire as well.
It does talk about desire. What type of desire? It talks about taste. What type of desire is he talking about when he talks about desire?
It's when he's splitting up kind of a rationalisation and like a dry a priori knowledge and desire, which I presume comes under the will, but I'm just making
Good.
that assumption.
Yeah, that's good. So it really would go over here. Anything else you can think of? Just off the top of your-
With desire, he talks about pleasure and pain as well.
Yeah, that's right. Pleasure pain issue. Do you know where he talks about that?
Yeah, when he's talking about the division of transcendental philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
He says, since the concepts of pleasure and pain are the desires and inclinations of choice, etc., all of which are empirical origin, must be presupposed when he's talking about transcendental
Good.
philosophy.
Anything else? Now, without going too far into this, who else speaks about some of these word-stroke concepts? What other theorists, artists, scholars, like in terms of the will? Who talks about the will? Who? Nietzsche. Okay. Schopenhauer. It's very important you get a sense of how influential this is. Who else? Anybody else you can think of? Is it a B?
Talk about it.
Not really. But there's someone with a B,
Benjamin?
ends with an N.
Benjamin?
That is Benjamin. No. Not no, but not yes.
No, yes.
Very true.
What did you say?
Batman.
Batman.
There's too many words.
What? Bergson. Bergson. Really important. So Bergson. So you can see how this, just with the will, the way in which Kant is influencing in different ways. What other words? So let's say teleology. Who speaks about teleology? Hegel.
Hegel?
Who else? Did Kant and Hegel live at the same time?
Hinged.
Trick, Weston!
They overlap.
They overlapped.
Kant dies in 1804 and Hegel in 1830.
So it's really not quite contemporaries.
It's a generation apart.
Generation is like more like a couple generations now. Hegel's a little bit younger. You remember when Kant was born?
1724.
1724. And when was Hegel born?
17.
Okay. So let's say that's true. I don't remember when Hegel was born. But that means that Kant was almost 60 by the time Hegel came.
But I believe there is another, the chronology of Kant and the history contemporary to him are particularly relevant because the three critiques are published in Critique of Pure Reason, the first of the three, is published, if not in the same year, 2 years after the French Revolution, which I think is very important.
Mhm.
And the other two critiques followed the next 10 years.
Right.
And then in 1814, the French Revolution in 1789, then there is a period of revolutionary state, then the terror, then Napoleon comes in, the empire, sets Europe in a blaze, it conquers it all. And then by 1814, Europe goes back with the restoration to the original order. There is a big closing down, a big conservative move. And that's when Hegel comes to the top. I always read them right out in
Can you repeat that just because there's some resonance for today? Say
the French Revolution, to generalize to maximum terms, is the apex of enlightenment.
Okay.
And Kant is there as well. It happens at the same time. Although Kant was certainly politically not on the same page as the French Revolution, but
Right.
for the rest, you could put them in parallel. And really, as a cultural atmosphere at least, and radically changing the order of things. Then the French Revolution is followed by
And when is the French Revolution?
1789.
Okay, everybody remember that.
And the first critique, if I'm not wrong, is 1790 or 1791.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting.
Then the other two critiques are published in the next following 10 years,
Mhm.
which, and at the same time, the French Revolution becomes the empire of Napoleon, which in the delirium of omnipotence wants to conquer all of Europe, Egypt, and everything else.
Did you say in Delirium of Henry Potter?
Omnipotence.
Oh, sorry.
It could be as well the delirium of Harry Potter at that point. But I
I
think
was thinking, kind of in the line of Harry Potter. I'm thinking, wow.
And then Napoleon is won, vanquished, defeated, exiled, and by 1814, all the kingdoms of Europe meet, and it's the Council of Vienna, and they restore the original order, and the Ancien regime returns, or maybe for a short period. So everything goes back into the same position, or at least in a stable position. And that, I always saw that as contemporary to Hegel, coming to its full maturity and so on.
So what do people think about that? It's kind of interesting when you're writing in the apex of, let's say, all this open thinking and, you know, very different environment than when things are closing down, you're writing in that environment. It's, I mean, not that those are the only two environments we're writing in, but that's kind of an interesting just aspect. Now, who else in today's world, in the contemporary world, is somehow directly relying on Kant? They could be alive or dead, but contemporary-ish.
Well, I would say Foucault, because
Foucault,
he's written
absolutely.
quite a lot on,
Foucault is obvious. And what do you think Foucault steals from Kant?
well, all the questions of the Enlightenment and, well, quite a lot, the sort of Technion, the transcendental philosophy.
Isn't that, what's that comment, you know, good artists or good, you know, interest, you know, smart people copy, brilliant people steal. I mean, it's
That's
like,
Nietzsche, isn't it?
what's that?
That was Nietzsche. who
Yeah.
said that, yeah.
But it was done, I think it was with artists, or maybe it was artists, good artists. I can't remember exactly how it went. Was it intellectuals or artists or whatever it was?
A genius. Good, brilliant artists copy, genius steals.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so we've got Nietzsche is dealing with some of Hegel. We've got
I think Heidegger.
Heidegger, absolutely. And what would you say is the Heideggerian lift?
Well, methodology for a start, a step back, looking not so much at the a priori categorical understanding, but existential understanding.
That's a very important, good point.
But I think to answer to Mattia, I think very important is Kant, obviously what precedes him, which is Leibniz, or rather Leibniz school, Wolf, who develops
I think it was actually
system. Wolf systemizes Leibniz, and Baumgarten and Meyer and Mendelssohn, who Kant actually taught Baumgarten for most of his working life. So he taught rationalism, and that's what he was answering to, or rather going beyond.
Yes, yes.
And also, of course, another lot of the empiricists, of course, as well. Hume, Berkeley,
And so you have, on the one hand, you have the empiricist, on the other hand, you have the rationalist, and I know that you did a good summary of them before. Can you briefly, or both of you did actually, can you basically summarize the difference between the rationalist and the empiricist and the similarities between
well,
them?
the similarities, they both of them have a realist position. They both take a subject-object position, which seems to take as given that a simple subject-object relation. In the rationalists, it's that kind of pre-established harmony that you find in Leibniz, where the object is in itself God-given perfection, and we have confused or inadequate understandings of that. So the more that we would understand, the more we can mathematize, let's go back to Leibniz. The closer we would be to God, it's much like that. So there's a subject-object relation there which is unproblematic, which you also find in, I think, in Hume as well. Just takes the object as a given. But perception.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Kant problematizes the subject-object relation by having this idea that it's actually a representation. So it's not so much that there's just an object and it's given and it's unproblematic, that the object itself is an appearance. The object itself is a thing in itself, which we have no access to. It's an abstract object X, which we have an idea, a concept of, but still is undetermined. And then the actual object is a representation. So he problematizes the relationship of subject-object, which from the way that, just one of the things that he does as well, in his philosophy, he that passes through the domains of technical understanding, critique pure reason.
So just to cap this, I want to make sure that we don't get too detailed yet. So one of the things you learn, one of the things one begins to find out in knowing about the traditions around which you are situated, is that there are traditions, and you have to decide: do I want to deal with these traditions? Do I want to ignore these traditions? In what way are they going to have a bearing on what you're doing? Now, in philosophy, and not just philosophy, because in your artworks, and I struggle to figure out how to put this so that it's not always dividing philosophy and art, this kind of, because I mean them kind of together. There's a sparring partner you have, like a boxing partner or an interlocutor. And you need to remember that will help you situate your arguments when you remember who your sparring partners are. And everybody sort of has these partners. My sparring partner is Lacan, as I've said many times, but not to such a degree that I want to take him on so much, because I don't really want to talk about him that much. I'd rather talk about other people. So other sparring partners tend to be Einstein, and these are the people that help you to think. Now, we're also in a time period that lays out a certain map. That map, in our case, is kind of, let's say, modern postmodernism, that move. And you take them on as your boxing partner, your chess partner, your whatever, however you want to think of it. You're having a conversation with that history present. So Kant is sparring with a lot of people, sparring, S-P-A-R-R-I-N-G, sparring with a lot of people. And at the same time, he's crafting a move. And I would see the work in that way, rather than coming up with for any of them, not just Kant. Not, like, there's not one interpretation for any of these people. There's a move that it's almost like you're catching a slice of where they are in the dance, and you're getting their move. And then you see in that move, whatever it happens to be, then who borrows what from the various moves that go on. What is Leotard borrowing from Kant? You know, what is John Mowat borrowing from Leotard, borrowing from Kant? You know, it just is a continuation. A lot of the animal studies stuff that's happening right now is very heavily engaged with Kant. They may not know it. The speculative philosophy, the object-oriented people, are positioning themselves against Kant, but haven't really taken on the argument around object versus subject. That's an old argument, you know, what is it the objective, or is it the subjective, or is the subjective the objective, and the objective is subjective, and you just let go out of mind after a while. So these are the questions. He's playing around with these things, and he's, like normally happens, you get annoyed at some of your interlocutors. You get annoyed at the people that have like gone before and have closed down thinking, or have, you know, created a certain environment that prevents one from breaking in. And so they become your sparring partner, for better or for worse, in a certain sense. They become somebody that you've got to deal with. And so with Kant, he's got sometimes he's wearing the garments of the rationalist and the empiricist. Sometimes he's creating that as a way forward, and then he goes, meh, I don't know. And so other groups can come and say, see, he's not really a rationalist or an empiricist, because we can see him going in this direction. You can see the different moves are going on. I want to alert you to this. I want you to be quite vibrantly attuned to this kind of delicate moves that he's doing. Now, the other thing about Kant that is very famous about him is you could set your watch by him. He had the most, let's say, straightforward living environment, where he every morning took his walk, and he walked to a bakery in Königsberg, and then he came back, and you know, and the account you always have of Kant is someone who did not travel, who did not know the world. All he wanted to do was do this little thing. And the other aspect about Kant, which is worth noting, is that he was by many people considered an utter racist, and you need to have a sense about this. Often when one talks about the Enlightenment, a lot of people that are opposed to the Enlightenment will say, well, you know, first of all, someone like Kant, who is like bloody racist. Now, I'm not saying that's good, or, I mean, it's obviously not good, but I'm not saying that one should just forgive and forget. But most of them are also horrifically sexist, horrifically, I don't know, whatever, you know, have religious issues, have, you know, whatever the issues are. So, steal what you can. I consider this room full of geniuses. Steal what you can from him. Deal how you will with it. See what works for you. Now, let's start with a very early move. And this is where we have the will as the ground, or what he calls the groundwork to the metaphysic. Now, there's a lot of discussion around really what does it mean to be talking about metaphysics to start with. I'm going to bracket that by just saying it's a problematic term, as we know. One of the moves is to, you know, denounce metaphysics, or to get out of metaphysics, or this kind of thing. What Kant suggests is he's not trying to do this. He's in the mix. He's in the world, and he's of the metaphysic, and he's basically making an argument. How does one move in the world to change things that does not, or to account for change that does not erase creativity? That's kind of it. So what do we mean by creativity? Can everybody be creative? Or only certain people able to be artists? remember again that we're talking about the late 1700s, or like mid 17 to late 1700s. And this is a moment when there's a shift as to what even means it to be an artist. And certainly in the Jacobean time period, you have, which is earlier, you have the relationship where people don't sign their names as an individual artist. Even Shakespeare, and earlier on, weren't necessarily writing by themselves as the single author who makes it. So when you read in Kant on the radical autonomy of the individual, there's a comment being made about how do we say, who am I? The I of me. Who's the ego I? Where does the will, my will, go? And I've mentioned this before in class. Will becomes an interesting operative, particularly in the moments right before death, or God forbid when you guys, or when I get a medical thing when someone says you only have X amount of time to live. The depression, the negative, blah, 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 but at one point there's like, no, I'm going to beat this, or whatever it is. And that will, how do you calculate that? How does Kant talk about calculation in that way in which you calculate, you metrically say, the will, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to go forward. So he has answers to these questions. He's not just writing in a vacuum on this. He wants, again, this to be both rational and sensuous. It's always a complicated scenario. How to be both rational and sensuous. How do you deal with the traditions that are around you and at the same time don't get swallowed up in them? One has to have a gentle or a real sense of how this thing, the a priori synthetic unity, exists as the fabric that you are encased, within which you are encased. This a priori synthetic something that you will now gravitate toward. The categorical imperative is another one of his main words, and so I just want to try and do a little bit of a, dots, so you get a sense of connect dots as we go on. The categorical imperative, what does it mean to have a categorical anything, and why is it an imperative? What does it mean to be an imperative? Grammatically speaking. What is imperative?
To be necessary.
Yeah, imperative. And grammatically, what is that?
It has to agree with the imperative.
Close-ish.
It's an order.
It's an order. An imperative is something, go here, do that. That's an imperative. And why is that called an imperative?
Because it's unescapable, inevitable. It's a keen. It is on the ethical side the same as a natural law.
Yes.
It's something there is no other option about.
And so if I said, well, maybe, you may say there's no other option, but I say, I don't believe you, and I'm just going to do it anyway. And how do you think Kant would respond without us opening the book yet? How would we, Emmanuel, respond to this? I mean, I'm thinking right now about the 200 plus young women that have been kidnapped in horrific circumstances in Nigeria and have, quote, disappeared. It's incredible. Now, obviously, they're not disappeared, and many of them now have been tortured, sold into slavery, whatever the story is. Now, you would think that there would be a thing called a categorical imperative, where that line would not be crossed, and yet the line is being crossed the line. So, in fact, one can cross a categorical imperative. One can say, go there, and you can go, well, no, I'm not going to go there, actually. And what happens, how does a categorical imperative manifest its strength of categorical imperativeness? How does it become?
Concept.
But the concept, Hegel, is, who knew, poor Lauren, the concept is not enough to keep something from straying. These are old questions. These are questions that Socrates raises.
Yes, it's the regime of the concept.
The regime of the
That's
concept.
what I meant
different.
when I said concept.
Well,
It's like, it's the sort of closure of that order.
okay, good.
It's
So
a system, isn't it?
good. So let's stick with regime for a second. You're right. It's a system, but the regime.
And that's why Kant's interesting, because he's getting at this, like, the taste thing is beauty without concept. So he's trying to get at how you get out of this kind of twist. But then,
Well, don't go further than that. Let's just take it very gently and slow. So we have this regime, and the regime where the concept lives in a wider, bigger, bolder manner, and therefore is operating in such a way that it presents itself as is, as that's what is. So, for example, the group, what's the name of the group that is taking these women? They're, basically. Boko Haram, yeah. And apparently that stands for, against Western teaching or something like this, or against Western education. So, it's not unrelated to the Kantian move, because Kant is in fact one of the major players. I mean, not that you can reduce history to a player, to one player, I don't mean like that, but where the notion of what it is to be called Western and this thing called Western thinking is coming right out of Kant. This is a Kantian move. Much more so than a Machiavellian move. So you need to get a sense of what is Kant suggesting where this regime, which is a secular regime, becomes the categorical imperative as opposed to a divine law becomes a categorical imperative. So the move that Kant is making, which allows for a positioning of creative thinking, a positioning of experience, of whatever this thing experience, because experience is such a weird word. And as Wittgenstein always says, experience teaches you many things, but the one thing it always teaches you is that it teaches you nothing. So which is very much so like, what is this thing with the Kantian move? I mean, a lot of political movements, art movements, Dada, situationist, expressionist, pop art, come from the varying ways in which Kant is positioning experience. Bauhaus, absolutely. Why? What is it about the way in which he's using that term that makes it relevant? These are the kind of questions we'll look at in the seminar, so I'm not asking you to come up with an answer right now as we're speaking. Now, when you were looking at the works of the Critique of Judgment and the related articles you want to look at, what kind of questions, and I just want to get a sense of the seminar and how we're going to really proceed with it, what are the kind of things that you really want to learn, that you think is going to, that drives you to really play with this? Is it nomina? Is it the difference between noumena and phenomena?
When I was talking last time we talked, I tried to build a bridge between the rationalists and their idea of an aesthetic to Kant and his paradigm aesthetic, which kind of kicks off the whole thing. So with the rationalist aesthetic position, in Leibniz, it's confused cognition, clear but confused, but remains within cognition. It's to do with knowledge. And then his students, as it were, Baumgarten and Mendelssohn, they kind of weaken that stranglehold. That's a bad word to use. They kind of weaken that
no normative position here.
They try to make the sensory have less to do with cognition and more to do with the sensory.
Right, okay.
So Baumgarten looks at the sensory in art as something in itself of value, not as something that's valuable to
add to art, yeah,
to
right.
cognition. And then Mendelssohn is the other one, looks at the sensory through its psychological understanding and the feelings that it produces. And this is a slight departure from the rationalists, which is the orthodoxy of the Prussian regime. state at that time, rationalism. So this is a movement, and just to jump somewhere, the Marxists, or like Terry Eagle would say, this is the beginning of the middle classes in a way.
And why is that? Why would
Because by starting to, he would talk about colonising the aesthetic. The aesthetic has somehow escaped the great philosophical understanding. Somehow they've got to colonise, he would say. Colonise the aesthetic, make it part of history, like capturing images, the whole thing. And by creating this kind of, by capturing art, by creating a kind of visual history language with it, you start to develop what will lead on towards the French Revolution, a different understanding through the release, or so to say, or into an engagement with the aesthetic. The book Baumgarten gives the first lecture on aesthetics in philosophy. Most people credit Kant with the first paradigm, but it's just a little bit before that. So there's a political move that starts there, that then heads off into the late 19th century, which is the rise of the middle classes, a different relationship within what basically what Matt was saying, a different relationship within society from this what happens to the sensual, which becomes an issue.
Yes, and to just carry on with this a little bit, because then we're going to actually crack the book, is that this thing called the middle classes, whatever this animal is also understood as decadent, is understood as dirty. It just doesn't quite, it's not like the scenario of the fascist scenario where the group does not fit in, and so you're trying to kill it. But it's just not as neat. It's so much nicer to be able to be either working class or ruling class. To be somewhere between this seems like you can't make up your mind, or you're a bit soft, or actually when I first came to this country, people would ask me, what class are you from? And I was like, I don't know. Well, the fact that you don't know, that means you're middle class. Okay, well maybe that, I'm thinking, okay, that's an interesting thing. And then you turn on the heat and they go, you are definitely middle class, because obviously you need heat. And you're like, sorry, excuse me, what is this? And then I began to learn that anything that fell out of you can imagine I was living in a very, I can't, when you have no money, you end up in interesting little groups of people. In my case, it was like the Socialist Workers' Party, so you can imagine like how complex that was. Heat, why? I mean, I was like, what about air conditioning? I knew that was probably really way off the map on that type of thing. Now, I raised this kind of question because this notion of the decadent Western bourgeois fill in the blank kind of thing is coming from this move. You have the will to do something, you want to go dance because it's your revolution, well, you're middle class and you're,
What's interesting about the rationalists, sorry if
Yeah.
is the language that they use, that they suddenly decided, well, we've kind of left this thing, this philosophical domain, and we want to look at it, sensory, art and stuff. Of course, it gets gendered. It becomes, the feminine is the feminine, to do with art. It's the rationalist is the male, and they have this supporting female role, as it were, which is essential. But that supporting female role then sort of does, through highways and byways,
of course, the move
develop.
And the move of the shifting female, I mean, it is true that the art person is supposed to be this soft person who's feminine, let's say, but then women are not allowed to be artists. So it's kind of like, what happened there? There's a little button that my sister gave me when I was in Pennsylvania this last time, which said, it has this woman dressed as a cleaning person, basically, and she is, I always wanted to be somebody when I grew up. I realize now I should have been more specific. Okay, and it's like this kind of thing, I want to be something, but, you just have to be shunted somewhere else. Now, in that context, the things that become soft, the things that become curved, the things that don't fit in, but not in a way of undermining society, and therefore, I mean, eventually being decadent, bourgeois, blah blah blah, is in fact, we used to have these buttons called Pinko Commie Queer. Everybody used to wear these little buttons that would say Pinko Commie Queer, because that was about it. You pretty much hit them all, you know, when you had that scenario. It's coming out of this mood that is very gently like being peeled open like a flower as opposed to an onion. And there's got a nice scent to it, and you're going to want to get into it, put your face into it, and if you start getting like that, woe betide you, because society could fall, there could be issues, there's a lot of problems, and we're in a society right now, we're in a moment of the society, the cycle, as it were, where there is a deep mood, a deep distrust for art and artists, and anything that has to do with that. Because do you generate money? Do I generate money? Not really, not really. You know, so it's an interesting problem. Okay, I cannot speak. So that's an interesting kind of issue that goes on. Now, are we ready to move into this? Do you think that is there anything else you'd like to? Stuart? Anybody want to say anything? Because we're going to open the critique of judgment. Did people bring the critique of judgment with them? Okay, good. Now, I thought we'd start with the two-sided things. One is the critique of judgment, and the other is the prolegomena to the metaphysics. I think that's really important. But we're going to start with the critique of judgment. Now, in the introduction to the critique of judgment, he begins to lay out the dilemmas, as we're saying. And it does circle back always to, I think what, well not always, but often to what Mark is talking about here, with this odd scenario of the rise of the middle classes. And it's not like which came first, the Kantian move or mercantile capitalism or whatever it is. I mean, what is it that really shifts the thing? I don't know. But there is something that is being articulated, just like the time period now, there's something that's happening in this time period that will have major ramifications as to how one deals with, engages with, breathes, speaks about the aesthetic or art. So let's take a look at this. Sorry, let's just wait 1 second. Oops. Sorry. Now, I've got the Norman Kemp Smith. There are better translations that have come out, but this is.
Or judgment.
Oh, I meant.
Judgment or pure reason?
I went pure reason. I didn't mean judgment, actually.
Oh,
Just-
that's okay.
Does everybody have?
I've got reason, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, thank you. Do you have it?
I told you.
Okay. Let me just start with the reason, and then we can go into judgment. Sorry about that. What? So, sorry. Okay. So you have this relationship between pure and empirical knowledge and between the notion of the a priori. So I'm just trying to give you a general scenario about this. The section I think that we should take a look at is how one understands this difference between the analytic and the way in which the analytic starts to play a role. What do we mean by the word analytic? Without opening yet the Kantian move, what does analytic mean for Kant? But you raised it, Sophie. What do you think it means? I mean, he says analytic means something and synthetic means something.
Yeah, well, analytic judgment is thought, he says, is thought through identity.
Okay.
So there's a connection with identity, and when there's no connection, then it's synthetic.
Okay.
Basically.
People agree with that? Okay, let's open this up. On page, it's section 4, the distinction between analytic and synthetic judgments.
Let me introduce.
It's in the introduction, yeah, sorry. So, people have it? Okay. In all judgments in which the relation of a subject to the predicate is thought, this relation is possible in 2 different ways. Now, what is a predicate?
I've been dealing with this question and I've become
Okay.
because to make the connection with Leibniz, Deleuze says that there are 3 great events of logic. He says like the Stoics and then Leibniz and Whitehead. But he says of like Leibniz, it's to do with how he treats the predicate. So when I was looking up what predicate was,
Okay.
I've got the actual quote if you want the quote about it.
No. Just,
I know. So a predicate is that which is predicated of the subject.
okay, no,
So it's
no, you can't
affirmed
use the
or
word
asserted.
predicate in this sentence.
Oh, so that which is affirmed or asserted as a property or attribute of the subject. That's a dictionary definition.
Okay, does anybody want to give a translation of that definition?
Something that's true by definition.
No.
No, it's pre, so it's got to be
This
before.
claiming belonging, it brings up this issue about belonging and inclusion
Okay.
that Deleuze went into in Fold.
It is what is claimed of the subject by the verb, yes.
Yeah, it's what goes before as
Whether
well.
the attribute or the property belongs to the subject or it's outside, it sets up inside and outside, which is the problem.
You know something? We're not going to start with that. We're going to start with the very beginning because I realize that it's wrong for me to have started without starting at the very beginning because that's just too complicated. Let's start at the very beginning. The very first line, which is a very famous line, Mattia, want to read it? The very first line.
Introduction. The distinction between pure and empirical knowledge. There can be no doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience.
That is quoted against forevermore. Do you agree with that?
It's funny, it's the first line, isn't it?
It's
like
the first line.
like, oh,
okay?
shall I go on with this book?
That's right. Can you read it again so people hear it?
There can be no doubt
No doubt.
that all our knowledge begins with experience.
Now, do you agree with that? Because if you don't agree with that, Kant's going to make no sense to you on this one move. Are you going to bite it? Are you going to take the bait?
But it's at the same time the kind of sentence that it requires
It was a dark and stormy night.
3 thick books like these to explain what it means, because
Yep.
it's not to be taken at face value.
Good. Okay. So,
Because otherwise one would not say there can be no doubt. One would say all knowledge begins with experience.
right. Okay.
So
So,
that
the
there
fact
can be
that
no
there-
doubt is a rhetoric trick to say, well, actually, there is no doubt,
but somebody has had a doubt.
plenty of
And
course.
plenty have had a doubt, and so we know already, just the opening salvo is that there has been a doubt, but there really shouldn't be, because anybody that does doubt that is an idiot. Of course, there are idiots, and they tend to be the people I'm going to now write the next 3 volumes against. Okay, what's the next sentence?
For how should our faculty of knowledge be awakened to action, did not objects affecting our senses, partly of themselves, did not objects affecting our senses, partly of themselves, produce representations?
Okay, stop. Next word that you need to have in your mind is the word faculty. Now, have you heard this word before, faculty? Like, in what way does the word faculty play in your life today at BCU?
Like different departments.
What?
Departmental.
Well, departments are within a faculty. And so, Kant, it's a very specific move. A faculty means something. What does it mean in Kant? What is the faculty? What is he referring to when he talks of faculty?
It's the ability of.
The ability of what?
of something. There are different faculties. In this case, it's the faculty of knowledge.
Faculty of knowledge, faculty of art, faculty of design. See how it changes? I'm just kidding. But I'm just saying that there's the faculties around which that becomes an overarching category. So the other thing to stick in your mind is what is the difference between a category and a faculty? Because he's not going to call it a faculty imperative. He's going to call it a categorical imperative. There's a category that is doing something in relation to the faculty. So on the plate, we've only got to sentence 2. We've got doubt, we've got experience, and we've got faculties. We've got faculties that are linked to this thing called knowledge, and knowledge is underwriting this thing called experience. Or is it experience that's underwriting this thing called knowledge? Or is it knowledge that's underwriting this thing called experience? Or is it experience that's underwriting this thing called knowledge? Or is it knowledge that's underwriting this thing called experience? Or are they same thing? Are they the same thing?
It's a full function.
Hmm?
A full function.
Well, in there,
Yes.
he's saying there's knowledge and there's experience.
Well, a judgment of experience, he's going to say, the prolegomena.
Okay,
the other one,
spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yes, right, okay.
is going to be an objective understanding statement like the ones they always give is when the sun shines on the rock, it heats up, which is an objective of experiential statement. And it sets against a judgment of perception, which is like the room is warm, which is subjective to me because Mattia thinks it's cold, or that kind of thing is going on already. That's
So,
already
experience
something.
is the basis of knowledge, or knowledge is the basis of experience?
Well, it's going to have to be. It can't be knowledge of nothing, so it's going to be knowledge of something.
So
It's
knowledge
going
of
to be
X, let's say.
So it's going to be knowledge of X. So there's a reciprocal relation between the two.
So is the X experience?
The X is actually a technical term. Object X in Kant is a technical term for an abstract object without any determination, which is not the same as the thing in itself, which is the object which we do not they'll know, and is slightly more abstract than, say, a representation. So you have these degrees. The thing in itself, unknowable, supersensible. Right down the other end of perception, if it was Leibniz, down there in the confused perceptions, right down there.
Perce-
The fine
confused
to the
cognition, yeah.
And then we have an object X, which is just a concept for a placeholder, if you like, and then the actual representation in itself. These levels of judgment. So you could start with this room is warm as a judgment of perception, and then make an objective argument, statement out of that. Something.
No, that's good, that's good. Okay, so now, in 2 sentences, we've done 2 sentences so far, and on the table, we have a lot of things growing now. We have this thing around the question of the object, that you can perceive an object, and in the perception of the object, an opinion of some sort gets manifested, which could be called a judgment in this example, but isn't. And at the same time, there's this notion of an object that has aspects to it that are not an opinion. They're not of an opinion. They're not of a judgment. Go on.
Okay, I will read the end of the paragraph because.
Okay, and then, yeah.
And then we go over because otherwise we'll. So there can be no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience. For how should our faculty of knowledge?
Wait, that's too fast, too fast. Say again.
For how should our faculty of knowledge be awakening to action, did not objects affecting our sensory, partly of themselves produce representation, partly arouse the activity of our understanding to compare these representations, and by combining or separating them, work up the raw material of the sensible impressions into that knowledge of objects which is entitled experience? In the order of time, therefore, we have no knowledge antecedent to experience, and with experience, all our knowledge begins in the order of time.
Okay, so what did he do there?
I think that's a nice acrobatic flip.
Yes. Read it again, if you don't mind, please.
There can be no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience.
Okay, so there's no doubt that knowledge begins with experience. So knowledge begins its walk, its long walk, with experience,
Not perception.
not perception. Very, very important. So experience and perception are not the same thing. Critical point. Okay, so let's start again. So what happens?
There can be no doubt
There can be no doubt.
that all our knowledge begins with experience.
Begins with experience and not perception and not intuition and not nothing else. Experience. Okay.
For how should our faculty of knowledge be awakened into action did not objects affecting our senses, partly of themselves produce representation, partly arouse the activity of our understanding to compare this representation, and by combining or separating them, work up the raw material of the sensible impressions into that knowledge of objects which is entitled experience.
Okay,
the-
so here's an object. My coffee.
Okay, so my experience of that object,
Mhm.
I'm working the sentence backward now. My experience of that, the thing that is entitled experience, is a knowledge of objects. So knowledge already was supposed to be at the top of the hierarchical ladder. That is made out of working up the raw materials of sensible impressions. The perception that Mark just said is not experience. Which have been combined or separated by the understanding that compares and separates the representations of these sensitive impressions that have come up to us, partially arose by the activity of understanding and partially produced by the senses. So in this sentence, there is the whole book.
Okay, did everybody get that? One more time. See, this is the
Maybe
problem
there is
between 4 and 7.
another element of another bit of information that one would need to
Okay,
do before that.
yeah.
It is a simplistic description of Kant, but it always helped me placing it. Before Kant, there were two major strands of thought. One empiricist and one rationalist, as we mentioned before.
As Mark was saying, yeah.
And for the empiricists, indeed, all our knowledge came through the senses. Nothing was in the mind that did not come into it through the senses. Not through experience, but through sensation, perception.
Okay, so just make sure that perception is understood in this example as coming through your senses, your touch, taste, whatever, right? Okay, that's not experience,
Now, the rational, and to them, to the
which is
empiricists,
interesting.
the mind would have been a tabula rasa, would have been empty, a blank slate. Had
Very
nothing.
Maoist.
You said it could be a compound.
Wait, sorry?
I thought there was a bit where it said it could. Oh, it's the next paragraph. It said it could
Yeah,
be
don't
a
go there yet.
compound.
Don't go to the next paragraph. We're just trying to
I
understand
know
this
there is
person.
that distinction.
Yeah. We just want to get this just as clear as mud as we can get it. Okay, so what we're going to try and do here is say there's this thing called experience, which is not the same thing as perception, which, by the way, is not the same thing as doubt, but it's another whole issue. And that this allows one to build some other relationship to the object. Is that what you're saying?
No, I was going to then put next to that, or opposite to that, the rationalist approach. Said that it was necessary to have something already in the mind that could organize these data.
What was the tabula rasa?
Tabula rasa would be a blank slate.
No, I know.
Or the mind.
Who's presenting that? Are you saying
The empiricists
Yes,
present
okay.
tabula rasa, and instead the rationalists put forward the idea of what they call innate ideas. Some ideas that are in our brain since the beginning, that are actually probably would make us human, that would help us all in organizing all the data that are coming in. And here say, well, there is no, the empiricists say there is no proof of these innate ideas and where would they be coming from. And the rationalists kept going back at the fact that without some starting hook on which to tie the data, it would be a complete smooth, slippery slope with no organization possible. And Kant is the one that, with this sort of stratagem, brings them together without merging them.
Right, good.
Because he keeps, and in this paragraph, this is why I found it, I just have noticed it now, they remain separate.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does say that there are the objects, no, the knowledge of the faculty of knowledge awakening to action did not objects affecting our senses, so that would speak to the empiricist, partly of themselves produce representation, and partly arouse the activity of understanding that belongs instead to the intellect, therefore to the rationalist, to compare this representation and combine them or separate them, and therefore they work up that raw material into the different organization. And they are both still working there, and together they constitute experience.
Mm-hmm. Did you catch that last little bit? Okay, so we're almost, I feel like, please let us not repeat the experience that we had with the monad. So,
I'm over to Leibniz now.
good. Okay, no. But the point is that experience, you know, so try it one last time to make sure you have heard this. Okay, so you have, let's say, perception, and perception is something that often is confused with or equated with experience. So just see them as different, right? And what then does experience mean if it's not perception? Don't get into the compounds yet, Lauren, so don't worry about that yet. So what does it mean then to talk about this compound thing?
So
I mean, this non-compound, experience versus perception. What is then experience in the context of?
Well, following what Kant just says, it's already something that is synthetic, not in Hegelian terms. But,
No. But in what terms then? What if it's not in Hegelian terms?
It's
What is
something
the
that
word?
has gone through. Again, the other I was going to say is they go through a dialectic, not the dialectic of Hegel. Or in other words, it's organized according to some specific markers or some specific paradigms. It's not immediate, as in it's not pure or raw. There are some raw elements here, the raw material of the sensible impressions, what really touches my five senses. But those are into that knowledge of objects that is in that experience. We are not dealing with the raw data from the sensible side. We are dealing with something that is already structured.
Okay, does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I was just thinking the experience kind of brings time into it because you've got to have the past
What else does it bring into it?
and space.
Yes. Dimension, movement.
He does say in this last sentence in this translation, he boldens that as far as time is concerned, then no cognition has precedes experience. So he's saying, as far as time is concerned, yes, but what happens when there is no time? When time doesn't factor into it. Yeah,
There's no time when there is no time.
What happens when you get outside of that sort of time? He's suggesting that there's something else outside of time.
And what is the else that's outside of time?
Oh, I don't know, yes.
We haven't gotten to paragraph 2.
But the ideas of reason.
What's that?
The ideas of reason.
And what are the ideas of reason that sit outside
a
of time?
priori forms that are called regulative. They are transcendental and not transcendental. It's sort of the end of the book is when one finds out what they get married about.
The idea,
Okay, hold on.
the idea of reason is going to be the transcendent idea of a unity,
Yes. Yes.
Transcendental.
and this is why it's related to the will and morality, and why we can't use that word sublime.
That's close. That's close. Now we're going to take a break. Probably because I think my pin is here. I'm becoming annoyed having to keep looking at this thing, and it's annoying me. Do you want to take a break? Take a quick break, a quick 5-minute break, coffee. We're going to try this new solution to the death of 4 to 7 time period. Is that okay? Just take a little quick thing. Coats, coffee, on the side. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out about this is the way in which we have, has anybody noticed in the text how it says B1, A1? What do you think that means?
It's all the different versions, isn't it, that he's written?
And isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
And have
All of them.
all of them sort of in the way in which they're trying to let you know where everything comes from. So I just wanted to point out, so don't like have a nervous breakdown when you're trying to figure out what all this means. Like just go back to the
Mine's printed in different coloured inks as well, which is quite interesting, like the different versions.
yeah.
So that's quite good.
Okay. Because it says things like in B, the introduction is divided into 5 sections and so on and so forth. So it gives you an idea that there's all different ways in which it's been translated. And that's why the Kemp at the moment has been the main standard. But there's a new one, I think that you were telling me out of Cambridge that was good.
Cambridge translation.
The Cambridge translation, maybe you were telling me that.
They've redone all Kant's works under a general editor, so all the language is consistent.
Sort of
through
consistent,
the,
so.
through the translation. So
Is that what
ones
we
I
have on the
use.
Dropbox?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so. Okay, let's begin now. If you can, so in the order of time, therefore, we have no knowledge antecedent to experience. In the order of time, we have no knowledge antecedent to experience. With experience, all our knowledge begins. Any questions about that so far? You okay with that? Okay. What's the next sentence? So here we have the next problem. Okay, ready? This,
Yeah, but though all our knowledge begins with experience, is that not follow that it all arises out of experience?
okay, is that a strange sentence? Read the sentence again beforehand.
But though
No,
all-
the one beforehand.
There can be no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience.
No, not that sentence, the last
For
sentence.
the last year, in the order of time, we have no knowledge antecedent to experience, and with experience, all of our knowledge begins.
So, knowledge begins with experience. And why did he mention time in that last sentence? Why did he mention time in that last sentence? You have any idea? Does anybody have any
So
idea?
it's to do with linear.
Okay, yeah.
Linearity.
Yeah, so the chronology.
Chronology.
It could have easily have been, or better translated as chronology, in the chronology of living. Yes? But you're
I'm
breathing.
thinking about these kind of theories that you have knowledge before born, you know, like something primitive, like.
Yeah, he's saying that's not the case.
Yeah, but then
And then what happens?
he said that not all the knowledge arrives out of experience, so it's contradictory, like, a little bit.
So,
Isn't that more like, I don't know how to translate it, only say it in Polish.
say it in Polish and we can.
I każdy kładzie to jest Post-Doctoral.
Yes, that's exactly right. No, so now do you know what you just said?
Well, it's not every square is rectangular shape. Every square is a rectangular shape, but not every rectangular shape can
Is a
be
square. Good.
It's totally kind of
Could be.
could be.
Okay, so let's go again. So we know that he's saying that no knowledge can begin without experience. But in the second sentence, he says,
But though all of our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. For it might well be that even our empirical knowledge is made up of what we receive through impressions and of what our own faculty of knowledge, sensible impressions serving merely at the occasion, supplies from itself. From, sorry, I was going to read the thing. And of what our own faculty of knowledge supplies from itself.
Okay.
So that's what doesn't come from experience.
So what doesn't come from experience?
What comes from the faculty of knowledge itself.
And what is the faculty of knowledge itself then?
Is that
Is it claiming an independent substance?
Is it like a well sitting somewhere? You go off to it. Like
it's,
a little library somewhere.
this is one of the points where to me in this tangent with Leibniz, it's a possibility.
Go back and read the sentence again. We're getting so close here.
But though all our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. For it might well be that that even our empirical knowledge is made up of what we receive through the impressions, so through the senses, and of what our own faculty of knowledge supplies from itself.
But didn't we just say earlier that there was a difference between perception and experience? Hello.
We wondered if you were there.
I will join you later. Yes.
Yes, but that is not contradictory to me, really. Because we just said that there can be no knowledge, all knowledge begins with experience, and although that's the case, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. So it begins in time, and it just said it at the beginning of the last sentence before, in the order of time, therefore, we have no knowledge antecedent to experience.
Okay, let's try it again. You were so close, and now we had the break, and maybe that wasn't a bad idea. So, okay. We know that experience does not teach us, let's say in this case, everything. We know maybe it teaches us a few things. Maybe it doesn't teach us anything at all. Maybe it just gets the ball rolling. Maybe that's what happens. Boom, you're born. And before you're born, or before you're in some kind of capacity of doing something with the brain or whatever, before that happens, you can have no knowledge. Okay, got that part?
Yeah.
Okay. However, where does perception come into the question of knowledge? Where does intuition come into? Is intuition the same thing as experience? No? Good. Okay, so where is it? Yes?
Well, I'm just thinking that's why he separates the pure and empirical knowledge. That's
Good.
Because one knowledge comes from experience, but the other knowledge comes from knowledge of the experience. Is that right?
Good.
So you already know, you have knowledge of the experience, your cognition, but you have you create a faculty of knowledge, right, of cognition, and from the second knowledge comes from that faculty because you already have that.
Right, except it wouldn't be really a second knowledge.
No,
It's
not
just
second.
another, it's like
Another-
dimension of knowledge.
He
Yeah.
Is
talks
that the
about.
transcendental activity?
Yes!
That's again.
Transcendental activity.
Okay, go ahead.
It relates to time, doesn't it? Because he talks about the inner experience, being conscious of your existence in time, but also going back to what Jakob was saying about the empirical consciousness. And he says that it's determinable only through relation to something which, well, bound up with my existence, is outside me. So it's like the existence outside of you informing the existence that you have of yourself as well. It's sort of.
Okay, I've lost you there. I don't need it, but maybe I just went psychotic for a second. Say it again.
Well, I'll read what he says because it's much better than I just put it. But through inner experience, I am conscious of my existence in time, consequently also of its determinability in time, and this is more than to be conscious merely of my representation. It is identical with the empirical consciousness of my existence, which is determinable only through relation to something which, while bound up with my existence, is outside me. So it's like the outside.
That's the metaphysical part of that statement. That
Very
it's
important.
outside.
And how far away is outside?
Thinking itself outside.
And what does that mean? You're right.
It's like these perceptions, it's like way down there again, way down there, way down there, the tunnel of unknowns.
God, we're going to be perfect
The
with
small
this
print
magic conference.
convictions. It's the small print convictions, really.
It's the small what?
What I would call the small print convictions.
Oh, the small
Yeah,
print
Where
convictions.
Leibniz talks about, I'll jump the subject in, but where Leibniz talks about the perceptions that are going into what I'm saying now from the future and the past. What I'm saying now is a result of all the perceptions, all my perceptions that were in me as a monad. All my perceptions that are creating what I'm saying now and all the future perceptions of what I'm saying now. That's the metaphysical part that he's saying, that that's the outside, futures and past, because we're talking about time.
And so the outside, probably another word for the outside that would make more sense to us moderns is the elsewhere.
Yeah, and I will also add that he's going to say that this is a metaphysics of nature, and he's kind of going to deny it.
Mm-hmm. That's very annoying.
Kind of.
Kind of, but not totally. But let's start again. Okay, just turn the page back over. Now let's just do that last sentence again.
In the order of time,
In the order of time, right?
we have no knowledge antecedent to experience.
So
And-
knowledge does not exist before the experience gets it going.
And with experience, all our knowledge begins. But though all of our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. So experience is already a
It's your
phenomenon.
triangle squares thing.
It's already a phenomenon where some things are taking place. So it's already a step up, it's not the ground.
Good.
And this is why I was saying the experience is already synthetic in some form. And indeed it says, for it might well be that even our empirical knowledge is made up of what we receive through the impressions and of what our own faculty of knowledge supplies from itself. So we receive something through the impression through the senses, and then the faculty of knowledge does something to it, processes it, that's what data.
Hmm?
And what comes out of that is experience.
You follow that? I feel like there's a quiet moment happening. Try it one more time.
Reading it or explaining?
No, explain it.
Explaining it. That
Explain it to Grace. She's got a face on.
Okay, I think I understand it as the faculty as a system for processing what or creates what experience is, but then perception is actually sensory experience. No, I can't use the word experience. Sensory interaction.
Good. I didn't mean explain it to you like you didn't understand. I meant talk to someone, not to the table. So now talk to Grace as though you were not explaining it to her, but just repeating it to her by looking at her.
No, I'm just trying to regain my stride now. What he calls so even empirical knowledge is made of what we receive through impressions. So the impressions are perception, sensitive data. Not sensitive is the right word. Data that have come to us through the senses. And when we're talking about senses, we speak about the five senses, very body-related impressions.
And that's important. So it's these five senses are the senses because they're called the body knowledge.
Yes.
You know, way forward. Yeah, go on.
And of what our own faculty of knowledge supplies from itself. So this is still playing to me upon the problem that was at the beginning of modern philosophy, Descartes saying how do the body and mind stay together? How do they communicate? How do they create an individual? And here is reworking the same problem, where it is saying so that on one hand we have the impressions, the sensual data, and on the other what is brought to it by our own faculty of knowledge, the faculty of knowledge as in itself, and the two together are.
So there can never be a mind-body split for knowledge. Knowledge cannot be split between, logic on the one hand and the senses on the other.
No, even more so, I would say here that the event of experience, the fact when experience happens, then one has the individual.
Good. Yes, that's it, but don't go there yet, because that's too fast.
But it's very Heideggerian, isn't it?
Well, it's very Kantian.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, because it's Heidegger who's borrowing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well spotted, yes, absolutely. Okay, so try it one more time and then we'll stop picking on you. Okay,
But to sum it up, knowledge, which begins with experience, is not made only out of experience itself, because experience itself is something that is not fully explained yet here, but is organized raw data. Where Kant says, on top of that, on top of the raw data, the impressions, there is some extra data that is brought to it by the faculty of knowledge itself. But the ability of knowing does something to the data that are known.
mm-hmm.
And together, these then creates the experience that then is taken up by the further steps in the process.
Okay, so just to be extra clear here, you start off by saying there's no doubt that experience plays a role in knowledge. And further than that, experience allows the ball to begin to roll. That ball is this thing called knowledge that Heidegger later calls thinking. And you know that thinking doesn't mean just having something in it. So then the next part of that is that experience allows for and kicks off the ability to think, but thinking isn't only comprised of experience, right? Thinking has to also include something that requires a bodily thing. So let me just say, experience is raw data, as you're saying, is this kind of raw data organizational.
No, experience is already a step up from the raw data. The raw data are the sensual impressions.
Yeah, sorry. But what I mean is that it's an organized, rational is too strong a word for it, but there's a logic involved in the experience. So how one experiences experience is already being involved with a knowledge game, with a language game of some kind, with a knowledge environment, right? But it's not yet knowledge in the sense it's not like very rigorous experimenting of X, Y, and Z. So it's a knowledge form, but it's not the knowledge. It's not the widest, most coherent form of knowledge. So experience, but it's not the first stage either, and it's not perception. So we now know that usually after the Hegelian move, and not because of Hegel, but because of interpreters of Hegel, there's this obsession between intellect versus feelings or emotions. And so you have like these two categories. One is logic and the other is the senses, something like that. And then there's a whole drive to get people to stop making that division. But with Kant, he's even more, let's say, rigorous in his various ways of allowing for different forms of non-rigid logic. Experience, perception, these are all parts that come into the senses that are required, that the body is required to be a part of. So he's not positioning a Cartesian move here. He's not dividing, not that Descartes did either, but the Cartesian move is usually to separate mind and body. So you could say to yourself, well, if I had this little brain without a body, I would be still able to think. And Kant is like, no, that would not happen. You cannot divide off like this. Okay.
So much that then the next sentence is, if our faculty of knowledge makes any such addition, it might be that we are not in a position to distinguish it from the raw material until, with long practice of attention, we have become skilled in separating.
Mm-hmm.
So this, to me, points at the idea that perception and intellect, or the square and the circle out of rectangulars and various elliptical shapes, are idealizations of of reality, not the original parameters.
Okay, you want to now just explain that again?
If, as it writes here, that our fucking argument makes it might be that
Take that.
that we are not in a position to distinguish it from the raw material until with long practice of attention we have become skilled in separating it. So if we were to separate it, means at the beginning the two things are encountered together. They're not distinct, they're not two different things. There is experience as a whole thing, and then we can pluck it apart. And
Okay, so we
find
have to carry on while I get this. A little bit of an emergency. I'll be right back. Give me some of my keys. Okay. I'm sorry about this. Continue. I'm going to.
and only by separating or opening up experience and its process, we realize or we recognize that there are raw data and something else that comes from the faculty of knowledge that recognizes this raw data. But it happens later on, or logically later on.
You have to, may I suggest that you now explain how you came up with the transcendental? Because that's exactly where we're going with that.
The transcendental logic is differentiated from general logic, because when you were talking about that knowledge, you think about the rules of thinking that we just general logic, law of non-contradiction, law of identity, law of excluded middle. These are basic to any kind of judgment. Yeah, that is what is needed in any judgment. You can't have a contradiction, so you have the law of non-contradiction. So, but a transcendental logic, so you have this kind of ordinary logic that you can say something like, all crows are black. That's like a universal all crows subject, esoteric being black, and categorical are. So that's how kind of logic works. But this transcendental logic, because that logic there could be mistaken for that experience, which would take us straight back to Leibniz, I think, where you have his interpretation of the rules of logic and thought of identity, A equals A, i.e. God and us, and the relationship that's between the two is a confused identity. See what I mean? Yeah. So this transcendental logic steps out, which is going to step outside of that logic and come up with a whole set of categorical, a table of categories, which he derives from the general logic of general judgment, like what I just said, universal, particular, singular, and derives these transcendental categories, which are going to be the faculty of understanding, which are going to turn out to be the faculty of experience. But the categorical concepts which are the transcendental logic, because this is a transcendental idealism. This transcendental logic is the a priori necessary for the understanding of the sensory, if you like. It's his version of the rationalist's move, but it takes it away from the ordinary general logic of A equals A, law of excluded middle, law of not bivalence, either A or B. So the transcendental categories, which he derives from, he tells us he derives from normal logic, are going to be for, you know what the categories are, most of you, I should imagine. You know the categories in Kant, no? At all? In the transcendental logic, in the table of understanding, yeah? So if you've got the one in quantity, which he derives from judgments of quantity about universal, singular, and plural, he has multiplicity, singular, and totality. He derives one or the other. I'm not going to go into how he does that. But that transcendental logic then is going to be always at the basis of any judgment. You're always going to find that at the root, at the base of it, is going to be this categorical understanding, this faculty of the understanding, which is on that intellectual side of things. And everything will, if you abstract from anything, any judgment or statement, it will go back to these categories of understanding in some way, because they are the most basic, necessary a priori for constituting the sensory impressions. Which you were saying, what you were saying about the knowledge that constitutes the understanding that takes the raw material is this table of categories. And of course, someone Nietzsche would come along and says, why the hell do we need this? Why bother with this? But then Nietzsche didn't really understand Kant, so it doesn't really matter. Why do I add that? I don't know. Anyway, so transcendental in this sense is just going to be this table of categories, the faculty of knowledge, or faculty of experience, as a table that helps with things in experience and helps differentiate that, in that case, between that and claims the things outside experience. So when I said to Sophie about how, when you were saying, what you were saying about the thing outside the empirical, which you might not know about, and I said, and he's going to deny that and understand that that's a metaphysical statement, that there's something beyond the empirical, that statement, something you don't know, is going to be metaphysical. He's going to deny that we have knowledge of that, which then cuts against the Leibniz move, where he would say, we know what that outside is. It's God, kind of thing. He's going to say is, well,
It's unknown.
it's unknown.
Yeah.
He's not going to deny it, because God is his thing. He's not going to deny it. He's just going to say, he's just going to add this caution to it, kind of thing. Which kind of permeates all through the Kantian understanding. He sets up, when we get into it, you'll see when the Critique of Pure Reason, which really deals with nature, how to cognize nature, things in nature, if you like, you're going to find that in that he's going to say things in a way that always relate to theoretical understanding set over against the practical understanding of the will and stuff. But he's always going to say that this theoretical understanding is for us. So it's not in itself, whereas the rationalists and the empiricists, they didn't have any problem with objects. They exist, there they are, they're out there, complete, Kant's going to say, they are objects, like what you said, but they are for us. It's how we perceive them, and they could be other ones. But we don't know. So there's a caution in that, which someone like Johnny would say that your Boko Haram, the guy, see him on, your kidnappers, was in direct, God was telling me I'm going to turn, he was saying, I saw him on the TV, translation, it said, I'm going to put these women to slavery, God tells me to. That's a category, that's a straight logic, identity, relationship, I to I, God. Well, Kant would be much more cautious with that, because he's got these separate divisions of thinking.
But also, to make just an example, the fact that if we don't see all of light, we see light from above red with vibration up to ultraviolets, but not beyond ultraviolets. Other animals can see below infrared or above ultraviolet, or machines can, or other animals can see even in ultraviolet. So there is, what we perceive of the world is just shaped through our possibility of perceiving it. So it gets a slant or a dimension, or in this case, literally a color, a nuance. It's not absolute. It becomes relative to our possibilities, as into our capabilities.
Limitations.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the notion of limitation is very important to me, because the notion of limitation and the notion of dimension coincide.
And limitation itself is going to be found within this table of categories when we get there, on the side of quality. As you say, what the word says, as the limitation and quality, in the sense of, say, where something begins or ends, like a limitation, or to take it to the critique of judgment, when you're going to talk about taste as having, we're going to be without interest and stuff, a certain kind of taste, disinterested taste, disinterested. The disinterested part is that quality. it's interested. If you had a disinterested beauty, that's a certain kind of quality. An interested beauty, or agreeableness in his term, different kind of quality. So that's how that's going to function. How you can see that starting to function. But the way I'm talking here, we're jumping from all three books, jumping through all three books here, which makes it really difficult for your good self to struggle with these strange terms for the first
Maybe
time.
the next paragraphs will be also helping.
Are you sure about that?
No,
Just
but
wondering.
progressively reading the book will help us understand the book.
Next sentence.
This then is a question which at least calls for closer examination and does not allow for any offhand answer. Whether there is any knowledge that is thus independent of experience and even of all impressions of the senses. Such knowledge is entitled a priori and distinguished from the empirical, which has its sources a posteriori, that is, in experience. A priori, Latin means logically before, and a posteriori means logically after.
But don't you feel this contradictory with all the knowledge begins with experience if there are something a priori of experience?
Yeah, but that's what knowledge brings to the raw data of the sensible. Experience is something that already has in itself something else. If you, at the beginning of the second paragraph, but though all of our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it all arises out of experience. So knowledge is a phenomenon or an event or something that happens when experience takes place. And for experience to take place, something has to be together in it. And what is together in it is partially the impressions,
Partially the faculty
and
of
what
knowledge.
the faculty of knowledge brings to it.
And
Not the faculty of knowledge, what the faculty of knowledge brings to it. The faculty of knowledge somehow is a container for something else, which are the categories.
And where is this faculty of knowledge coming from?
It is the
I'm
Not from
thinking of it
experience.
as habit, is that
At the very beginning, what's happening? Do you understand my question?
Yes, but that's precisely the whole game of Kant, is that it sort of turns inside out.
Well, the faculty of knowledge, or the categories, the faculty of understanding, like the faculty of experience, is the rationalist part of his argument,
Yes.
since it's always already there. And this is like, you can use this to criticise someone like Hume, when he said, Hume, the empiricist, says, okay, just arrives to us through our impressions. Hume's got no idea of a subject, an eye and stuff, but he's already used it in the fact that impressions arrive on what? On to who? To an eye, so he's already contradicted himself there. So in this case, he's saying that, that there is already, and it's going to turn out to be space and time, these internal and external a priori conditions that are always already with us. But that's what I'm saying, that whatever you go back to, you can't escape from things like space and time. It's going to be quantity,
Yes,
quality,
that's
relation,
really,
and
really
rotation.
different from, because in the multiplicity of Leibniz, Leibniz is rejecting absolute space and time, whereas in here he's saying that if you remove the colour, the hardness, all this stuff that you experience, you're left with the void of the space, so space and time is still required, and that's why he's placing this a priori, whereas Lyotard gets rid of the a priori. That's why it's the assassination.
Oh yeah, well that's what they do with it. But where it says, when you said there, the void, that's the kind of Heideggerian move that, that's the Kantian move that Heidegger makes, because Kant, if you like, Heidegger rather, if you like, with what is metaphysics, starts with nothing, the void. He steps back, and his space and time becomes a void, because there's nothing within it, and then it gets filled up. But it's still really, what he's saying is that you can't get out. If you try and think of anything outside of time or space, or trying to explain anything without using quantity or quality or relation or modality or possibility or something, it's impossible. You try and say anything and not like bring in the idea of quality, quantity, time, space. In this end, that's impossible.
There are the tools to make the categories. Like you need some tools.
Yeah, the tool. That's the toolbox. Yeah.
But that's sort of implying that time and space are there as a base that's the void that's already there.
Yes.
Whereas but
That's
that can
the
be rejected.
I'm sure there's many philosophers that do, but that's not.
But
Kant.
at the same time,
he's
it-
saying that
Yes, that's the problem with it. That's why it's a
No, no, no,
that's
no,
the
no.
synthetic a priori is that relationship to time and space to start with. The
But
first
the-
chapters of the critique of is going to talk about sensibility, and within that, the synthetic a priori are going to turn out to be space and time.
But they are already there, but not already there per se.
No, they have to have a relationship.
Because they are
with
transcendental.
experience. Yeah, because it's empirical
the
and rational.
methodology is more radical because it's already
No.
sort of making the movement of like rejecting as absolute space and time.
But precisely, space and time are not absolute. They are transcendental. They are not transcendent. To me, it's the biggest difference in concepts in philosophy. Transcendent is somewhere else.
It's not metaphysical.
And it is often immaterial, intangible. Is somewhere else. Transcendental is nowhere else and is not concluded here. So what Kant is saying is that our intuitions always take place organized with space and time. Space and time are concepts or ideas that we use to regulate and organize these, but they are not anywhere else. And yet, we would not have the possibility of organizing the raw sensitive data without space and time. It's a sort of thing that turns around on itself. Almost is not me, but somebody pulling themselves up by pulling their hair up. It's self-reflexive as a thing. It's like, or make another example, language. Language is not concluded in any of us, but is nowhere else either. There isn't the totality of language somewhere. But none of us, no dictionary, no collection of library contains our language either. So it's an open thing. And as long as it works, it's fine. So in this sense, it's not less radical than Leibniz. Leibniz speaks of space and time as a relationship between objects.
And that's the non-problematic nature of the subject-object relation.
He rejects the utopianism of Leibniz, and he rejects that there being a void.
Yes.
So this is creating the void.
I believe that Mark is speaking of void in
Hiding.
but not in these physical terms, in ontological terms. Yeah.
Well, I was making a connection with how, like, Leibniz rejects the void, and it's that void that Leibniz rejects that he's still, like, installing.
Can you read the sentence there? Because when you've gone ahead of two paragraphs. So we are right to empirical, a priori, and a posteriori, right?
It's well, I'm not quite sure where the beginning of that is. It's things that it's in the next section.
Well, we need to get there. There is too much.
I don't know.
Can you repeat the idea, the difference? Sorry, finish.
Yeah. No.
Between transcendent and transcendental.
Transcendent is the traditional idea of God. It's somewhere else, outside our dimensions. He is almighty, all-powerful, lives in eternity, does whatever he likes, is beyond the laws of physics. It's God. Appears, disappears, whatever. Magic. And on this side, it's a contingency locked in space-time, series of events. Transcendental, instead, is something that somehow acts as if it were God, but is not somewhere else, or at least doesn't have a substance or an essence outside. It's not beyond the limit.
This is too idealistic because of that still.
You can making a very long jump, or just to give you an example. Tradition would have thought that we have a soul. Maybe you can put your hands on it, but the church would assure you you've got a soul that will survive you, go to hell, go to paradise. That's psychoanalysis says, well, there is a set of drives that are completely undefined, and in the process of translating them into language, you become an individual. But if I would try and look inside you, I would never find that individual. So somehow you're constantly in the making.
Okay.
It's like the musical chairs, in a certain way. As long as you can play the game holds, but when you have to sit down, someone loses. So it's a very, it's in the two, the AL at the end, between transcendent and transcendental, there is a complete change of paradigm.
It's like something that you cannot explain, but you know that it's there. Something like that.
You might even try to explain it, but it's very much like the vertex. I believe we're jumping ahead of ourselves actually, but very much so. But it's the vertex of a pyramid or of a cone. The soul or the idea or God or the principle of cause and effect that you use for judging is the most abstract of all cause and effects you see in daily life, and it's up there. But what Kant is doing with this is taking off that vertex, that apex, and saying, well, we just project to infinity all the cause and effects of episodes we've seen and imagine or act as if there was a cause and effect somewhere, or there would be a God somewhere who guarantees that the world is, or a telos or whatever else, or a soul at the bottom of all the instants of my life. But that's at the end of the 400 pages book. It's at the moment it's still between a priori and a posteriori.
Yes, can we go back to that?
Okay, now I'll reread the short paragraph. So he just said that we might, if our faculty of knowledge makes any such addition, it might be that we are not in a position to distinguish it from the raw material until, with long practice of attention, we have become skilled in separating it. So the lot of experience can be taken apart into the impressions and what the faculty of knowledge brings to it, but it takes quite a bit of ability to recognize it.
I was just going to say, is that not what Kate was saying though, that it's just habit? So after so many times of experienced something, you're bringing through your own knowledge the fact that you've already experienced it, and that's what you just continually do.
No, it's the process of...
As Johnny
Yes.
says, it starts the ball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, once it's started,
You don't need to return to it. Almost,
yeah,
it's
habit can kick in.
I believe here is going deeper than that. He's referring to sorry, to the long problem that skepticism of Hume brought in. Mark here can correct me with more. No, the criticism of causality of Hume, or the problem of induction, where we see that every time I let this toy falls, or every time I hit it, it breaks in half, then I assume that there is a causality between hitting it with a hammer and breaking it in half, and we project it to the next time in the future. Think next time I will hit it, it will break in half. So, and then from these we can see that if I play with my chair too long, the body will fall backward, and I will see another relation cause effect. And then we look at all the relations cause effect we encounter in our life, and we think, well, there is a principle of causality, abstract, that is applied to all these little phenomena. But this would be an abstraction, or better, an induction process from all the small episodes, all the small examples, abstracted, until you find something that you think it is pure, and exists per se, and is applied every time we hit something. Obviously, we hurt our foot or our head or whatever. And it is, but to get to that point of, or to say that the opposite of rectangle being containing squares and not vice versa.
Yeah. So
Every square is a
all the
rectangle, but
squares
not
are-
every rectangle is a
yeah.
square. So you get to that point only with a lot of skill when you've taken apart all your elements, all your moments of encountering the world. That it doesn't happen straight away. And then he explains in the following paragraph what is at play in this taking apart these. And he says, this then is a question which at least calls for a closer examination and does not allow for any offhand answer. Whether there is any knowledge that is thus independent of experience and even of all impressions in the senses, that's the problem before, that we just mentioned. Such knowledge that is independent of experience and even of impression of the senses is entitled a priori and is distinguished from empirical which has its sources a posteriori, that is in experience. So there is a knowledge, some things we know that happen outside the senses. And we call this a priori, something that exists, say, per se. And then something that as its sources a posteriori is already synthetic. And that's the empirical one. That's what we find in experience. So there is a knowledge that comes through the senses and the way they're organized. And then there is another form of knowledge which knows something beside what comes from
But
the
that
senses.
knowledge cannot have experience in it, is it?
It's not experience, precisely.
So where
But
does
then
it come
again,
from?
going back to the, if all knowledge needs experience for it to exist, right? That's what
For it to start,
for it to start. Okay.
which is very different.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's not quite as divisive or as strict.
Almost,
Is that-
I would say it might even be, but we are walking backward.
No, right. I mean, it's kind of like, like I was saying earlier, spoiler alert. You don't want to necessarily know what the end is. But at some point, one of the things that's very important about Kant, and at some point it'll become clear as we get along, is that just like there are many different types of logics of, let's say, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and so on, there's many different types of the logic of senses. And he's showing you how they start to build. What happens more or less after the Hegelian move is that it's divided between, it gets very compartmentalized between object and subject. And then there's discussions of which is the object or which is the subject or is it the subject object and so on and so forth. What he's doing is preparing the environment for you to begin to understand how different logics within the sensory environments actually can be ascertained, which is why Adorno, I thought you were going to speak about Adorno, which is why Adorno, or one of the reasons Adorno goes back to Kant and starts to look at how he organizes logic. And this is, of course, why a lot of the artists follow a Kantian move as opposed to a Hegelian move. Not that that's like ironclad, but there's what we're going to see as we go through this is how he starts to thicken the so-called the groundless ground of the senses. So he's going to start to approach this question of how does one have some kind of way of identifying whether or not this is good or bad. Forget about good art versus bad art, but good or bad, ethical or moral. Not that that's good or bad, but how do you start getting into this scenario? So when he talks about like the radical autonomy of the individual, it's not just some sort of person marching off and being a radically autonomous person, which is often how it's taken in certain forms of political science and so on. He's teasing out how one must give the senses their due. And to do that, you have to allow for these various measurements, which is why he starts talking about them in terms of mathematical dynamical, which is not meaning by that mathematics as such. He's talking about how these have a certain form of a logic. Now, how far do we get on this?
Start here.
Excellent. Okay, if we go back, just flip. Can you read this bit?
So this is the alternative beginning.
This is the alternative beginning, and what is that one entitled?
The idea of transcendental philosophy versus what we were reading now is the distinction between pure and empirical knowledge.
Okay, so this is like, how to read bilaterally, basically, because this version, so in the first version, which is basically considered more standard or more accessible or something, has more of a presence, you begin to realize that what makes up the question of the metaphysic is the pure versus empirical reasoning. In this category, it's been translated strictly as metaphysical. And it'd be interesting, it's a shame that the German isn't with us, so we could actually look at how Kant actually wrote it. So we could, I don't know, has anybody looked at the German translation?
I have a tool, German, Italian.
And it's closer to the This one, the
I
bottom.
don't remember it now.
Oh.
Like, you know,
That's
like
why I'm
this-
confused. What, is that a different section in here? I'm looking at.
Are
Or is
you,
that different?
are you the Norman Kemp
Oh, this one.
translation? Is that Norman Kemp?
There should be an A, the B1 and an A1.
Is it the A version you remember?
It's the B version.
No, we
No,
read
it's,
the-
it's, it's, sorry, it's the A version. It's the A version.
Yeah.
It's just, well, mine should have that chapter, or I'm not quite sure why we jump into a totally different bit from where we were. Where are we going from where we were?
So on the same first page, page 1,
Yeah,
I see your,
I just didn't know quite where we were going to next from there.
yeah, you have the B1.
but maybe the A
Only
one.
unless you have the all A introduction at the end of the book. Or,
Yeah, see if A is at the end of your book.
So, oh, I don't,
Okay, so the first, so the category, if you could read the topics again, just so we know what we're
So
talking about.
what we were reading is titled "The Distinction Between Pure and Empirical Knowledge," and what we are going to
Wait,
read.
wait, and, sorry, and just to be clear, so the pure knowledge, did you discuss what the, we know that,
we didn't get to that.
Oh, you didn't get to
we were
that.
about to get to it.
okay, so just to know that pure knowledge for Hegel is very different than pure knowledge for Kant. In this case, okay, go on.
So the idea of transcendental philosophy. Experience is, beyond all doubt, the first product to which our understanding gives rise. In
Okay,
working up
stop,
the
stop,
raw
stop.
material
Oh,
of
sorry.
sensible impressions.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was the end. Okay, can you read it again, sorry?
Experience is, beyond all doubt, the first product to which our understanding gives rise in working up the raw material of sensible impressions.
Okay, now read the first sentence of the
There can be
version.
no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience.
Do you think they're saying the same thing?
No, he's changed his mind, I think.
Well, it's the translation, right? Well, it's later
Translation
editions.
changed his mind. Which happens.
That's right.
First of all, he says there is no doubt, and there's beyond doubt. So there is doubt, but there's something beyond doubt.
Mm.
Right.
Which is
But also, what produces what in sentence 1 in the B version?
it's-
Experience is the first product to which our understanding gives rise.
So this is like understanding produces experience,
Mhm.
gives life to experience, and this way it's experience
Begins.
gives life, begins knowledge. It's,
Right.
It's necessary for knowledge. Yeah.
And which one would you say sounds like closer to a Hegelian move than a Kantian move?
I think the first one.
You think the first one?
Yeah, because
That no
it's-
doubt that knowledge begins with experience?
Yeah, because to me it sounds more socialised.
Hmm.
Knowledge being socialised, it's going to be objective. I mean, we've said judgment of experience is objective. So we don't live in a vacuum. He's not starting from within a vacuum. He's starting from within a place, a world, a regime.
But what if?
So why do you think the? why do you
Because
think-
if I think the experience is beyond all doubt the first product of our understanding, that I was saying is right. It's the idea that I'm here. I feel a number of things, such as temperature, sound, the corner of the table, and then I realize, well, I feel these things, therefore they are not me, but I feel them, and I start this game of distancing and keeping together, and then the understanding organizes them and makes it they are my experiences, so it makes a synthesis. I would say these more again.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
And why do you agree?
Well, partly because when he talks about the raw material of sensible impressions, that the impressions are important for the experience.
Okay, so yes, I think that, I mean, if you're having to choose, I think that the second one, or this version A, suggests that you start with a not something. In this case, I'm referring to it as Kant is referred to it in this case as the concept, and that produces an environment around which a synthetic move will create a ground. That ground will be the experience around the concept. So, in my reading anyway, I did think that A was closer to Hegel than B. However, what's important here is not whether or not who's saying what, but what's important here is for you to get a sense of the nuances around which, if you say experience generates thinking, which is what he's saying there, then you must understand how experience itself is not intuition or perception or opinion. And what happens very easily to people when they're just starting out grasping of this notion of experience is that one tends to collapse my feelings, my gut, my senses into this thing called experience. So for years I would not allow the students to read the section on experience because it so easily can be interpreted as something much more simplistic than it's being said here. So it feels like, I feel like I'm like going through I'm breaking open a taboo for me, because I really was very worried about doing the Kantian move with you, because it's asking you to think about experience in a way that you need to get rid of whatever you've thought about it before, without getting rid of the passions that are involved. So in either case, it's a move toward grasping a certain way into this thing called the transcendental. And that's what I want you to try and begin to also get a hold of. And also the word analytic with respect to this transcendental, which Dane brought in. Okay, so now what do you think, I just wanted you to hear that first bit about the A, so that you could get a sense of how the translation operates. Now, with respect to the knowledge being produced by some form of experience, that knowledge, that the road to knowledge begins with something called experience, which I think is something to do with your thesis, for example, your walking thesis. It has a lot, has a lot in there in terms of like to walk is to get the knowledge, something like that. So there's going to be something, you're going to pull on that. So, but then what does pure knowledge for Kant mean?
It will be the a priori knowledge, the things that the faculty of.
Good. And how is it that knowledge can exist a priori?
Yeah, that's the question.
That is good.
I think I have a
That's the
problem with
question.
priori.
A priori, or, yeah, a priori, yeah.
As in that before. Like,
Yeah.
As an understanding as of before.
Of the notion of this thing called
Yeah.
before.
Because I don't think that knowledge is not time-based. Would it be?
Right, good,
Because the experience moves the knowledge in a way. But
good,
that's the empirical knowledge, basically,
right,
that we produce from experience and then the faculty of knowledge.
right,
But that, as you said, is elsewhere, but it's not time-based at all, which the other one is very time-based. That needs to happen in order for that to have a cause.
right.
I mean, it's spatial.
No, I don't think it has those attributes at all. I don't think they exist there.
Yeah.
That's why the word
It's
priori
outside of space
can
and
be
We
time,
simply
yeah.
haven't
confusing.
got
Yeah.
to the paragraph, whatever it's saying is that there is no confusion about this. A priori, it has got nothing to do with space and time.
Mm.
Right. So the question of this thing that is called a priori or a priori, this exists, you're right, to question the word before, which is why they don't call it before. So it's not like there's something and then experience comes into the game and everybody's like now able to think. It doesn't work like this. So there's something that we've studied not that long ago that has sort of characteristics of what one might talk about as a priori. But let's not go there yet. Okay, I'm going to use that word yet. Can you, I think we might be ready now before things, sorry, to go into, well, actually, maybe we should just go to the next paragraph, because, did you do the second paragraph?
Yes, up to, yeah.
Okay, so it says, such knowledge is entitled a priori. So this then is a question which at least calls for closer. Whether there is any knowledge that is thus independent of experience, which is not a before or an after. It's independent of experience, and even of all impressions of the senses. Such a knowledge is entitled,
Pure.
well, a priori, but what else could it conceivably be entitled? Okay, I'm going to let that lie for a second. It's entitled, and distinguished from the empirical, which has its source as a posteriori, that is, in experience. Okay? Now, empirical then gets linked with science, which is, of course, Italian for, or Latin for knowledge, certain kind of knowledge, scientia. So empirical, the empirical sciences are those things that you can observe and therefore make deductions from. So and that would be a posteriori. So the question a priori does not mean before, it means without. Now, we'll try and get down to the paragraph. If you can just read those two paragraphs
Okay.
and see if we can get there.
The expression a priori does not, however, indicate with sufficient precision the full meaning of our question. For it has been customary to say, even of much knowledge that is derived from empirical sources, that we have it or are capable of having it a priori, meaning thereby that we do not derive it immediately from experience, but from a universal rule. A rule which is itself, however, borrowed by us from experience. This should be unpacked, there is a lot in it.
Yeah.
Thus, we would say of a man who undermined the foundation of his house, that he might have known a priori that it would fall. That is, that he need not have waited for the experience of his actual falling. But still, he could not know this completely a priori, for he had first to learn through experience that bodies are heavy and therefore fall when their supports are withdrawn. In what follows, therefore, we shall understand by a priori knowledge, not knowledge independent of this or that experience, but knowledge absolutely independent of all experience. Opposed to this, it is empirical knowledge, which is knowledge possible only a posteriori, that is, through experience. A priori modes of knowledge are entitled pure when there is no admixture of anything empirical. Thus, for instance, the proposition every alteration has its cause, while an a priori proposition is not a pure proposition, because alteration is a concept which can be derived only from experience. It sort of goes inside out as in the syntax.
Can you repeat that one sentence that you said needed to be unpacked a bit?
What is it? Thus we would say of a man who undermined the foundation of his house, that he might have known a priori that he would fall. That is, that he need not have waited for the experience of his actual falling. But still, he could not know this completely a priori, for he had first to learn through experience that bodies are heavy and therefore fall when their supports are withdrawn. We just briefly touched upon this problem earlier. To me, this refers to the problem of induction in Hume and the skepticism.
In Hume.
In Hume,
Yeah,
yes. Well, Hume gets at this from various angles, but he's basically saying the fact that we have seen something happening until now, that every time I put fire on the water it boils, gives us no guarantee that it will happen again next time. So, or that the fact that if I drop a glass from the window, it will break, or if I hit my head with a hammer, the hammer will break. In other words, the problem of causality, the relationship cause effect that we have seen happening until now, we can take it as an habit and hope, or just even claim that it's mostly probable that it will happen again like that. But the causality as we have seen it gives us no certainty that it will repeat itself. And in the same, the same problem comes up with sequence of numbers for you and others. But so the problem is the past does not allow us to predict the future. So you put a spanner in the world of science entirely, because you say, well, all the science can do is multiply experiments in great number to narrow down the hope that it will happen like that next time, but the absolute certainty, 100%, is not there. And here, Kant says, refers to this by saying, well, our man, why should he be a man again? Is why Kant is so male-oriented in this order, undermines the foundation of his house. He would know that it falls, but he would know it because he has seen it earlier. So he would be applying an experience or previous information, not to use the word experience, which was seen in this dense, to say, well, if I take all the bricks at the bottom of the wall, the wall will fall upon them. He would have to have seen it already. So it is not a pure experience. Pure experience should be something that one can claim or can get at without need of external information.
So what would that be?
All consequence have an antecedent in this example.
Right.
That's it. That's the rule. That's the rule, the law that it goes back to. There's nothing behind that. All consequence has some antecedent.
Right.
That's the rule.
Okay, and so therefore, is there such a thing as pure knowledge in Kant?
Well, we're still arguing about that. It's still up in the air.
So this becomes part of the game that's being put here. And clearly, if you remember the title of the book, Critique of Pure Reason, there's a critique going on. Can you actually have
Pure reason.
pure reason? And part of the answer is yes, if by pure you mean a priori, but by a priori you do not mean that which is including somehow experience. So is there anything you can think of in the last few weeks that might bring up something similar to the problem of not having any relationship to experience that we've spent many weeks on? What?
Marinade.
Marinade. Yes. Yes. Now, think about it. I mean, it would make a very good MA question. Not that you have to do anyway. What is the similarity and what is the difference between a monad and a priori reason? Like.
That's an MA question, Jesus.
What becomes very, to me, what is very interesting in Kant is that this pure knowledge, or this pure reason, is no longer knowledge of something, but becomes a method for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So, that relationship that Mark very importantly brought up earlier, that was shared between empiricist and rationalist, of the relation individual object, that was aligned, and had the object at the one end, and the brain at the other, or the mind at the other, is now somehow the infinitesimal monodimensionality of the line is opened up as a flower, because it's what Kant is analyzing is how the line works,
Mm-hmm.
not what the line finds.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fascinated by it, I think that's very much, to me that's art, because it's not.
So now you're sounding very much like Leotard, but that's fine. But no, so can you repeat that again? Because I'm not sure if, this is what I mean by the 6:45 slump that happens here. It's very exhausting. You're hanging on by little eyelids. It's
the pure reason, it was accepted or hoped that it would be a pure reason, or better, a pure knowledge, a knowledge of something pure. Kant turns this into a problem. Says it is really true, how it works. And what it does to me is that it turns the object of his study from what would be known as pure to a pure methodology of reason. Or better, what is the pure reason is the methodology of knowledge. So the relationship that was taken without critically before him, both by the empiricist and the rationalist, of a direct line of a direct relationship between the individual and the object that the individual will be knowing, is taken as the object of study for Kant, the relationship. And if the relationship was transparent, monodimensional before him, now it becomes multidimensional, is what he's studying. So he's opening up this imaginary line between my mind and my glass case, and studying how it happens, back and forth. It speaks many back and forth. So he's opening it up in all these, and these lines that was, as we know, a sequence of infinitesimal points. It becomes a whole surface of work.
Okay, so now where we're left with, you're right. I mean, that aspect is very well stated. I would like to know if the way we've opened this up, you want to continue like this. Of course, we might need a few more weeks if we're going to continue at this pace. But I think we need to spend a little bit more time just figuring out this a priori. And then, and if you could also, did anybody have a chance to look at the groundwork of the metaphysic? It's a very thin little volume.
What's the name?
That to the Prolegomena.
Yeah, the Prolegomena.
Prolegomena.
Yeah, the Prolegomena, which I've never pronounced right, and it's always irritated me. You told me this one day. Anyway, and I will continue to unfortunately pronounce it incorrectly because I've memorized it now incorrectly. So, can you pronounce it?
The Prolegomena.
The Prolegomena.
To any future metaphysics.
It's like aluminium. Drives me insane. Aluminum. Anyway, this little tiny volume, underrated and hardly ever read, really clarifies these volumes. It's like 80 pages long. You could just read it while you were preparing your dinner, and then maybe eating the dinner.
Oh, that'd be a big dinner.
That's right.
Last all year, that
It's an excellent.
I think I had the stove on.
What's that burning?
It was written by Kant for students.
Yes.
It was common at the time that a big author would write an introduction for students.
Well, it's meant for future teachers rather than apprentices, he says.
Yeah.
Very diplomatic.
The second
Yeah.
age, yeah.
Yes, but it is such a wonderful read. I mean, if you're excited about this kind of, is anybody excited about this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Or am I just like?
a priori, is it?
Pardon me?
The monad is not a priori. That's
No, it's
that's
not.
the big
But
difference.
it's not a priori, but it is without experience.
But at the same time, it does not exist without the body.
Yes, so in
In
Leibniz, it doesn't exist. So it's not that connected, but the only thing I want you to get a sense of is that there can be something that creates a logic that has to do with the senses that is not perception, and in this case is also not experience, but is something else. And of course the Leibnizian move is always connected to the body. But in the Kantian move, there's something else going on here. Now, I hope this is exciting some of you on this kind of thing, but when you read the Prolegomena, sorry, somebody will get this right. It's like the word S-I-A-N.
Sean.
Shan. I've had to spell it S-I-A-A-A-A-N so I could learn how to say it. Shan. Because it just did not come out. But I'm going to have to do the same thing with this word. But anyway, the point is that the book is fantastic because it begins to show you what is going to filter, and particularly in your work,
Yeah.
to a lesser degree in yours, I think, but probably it'll come into it. The way in which this layering, this sort of fabric at the moment, we're in this sort of clunky realm of the groundless grounds. It's kind of less good looking, less sensuous way of putting it. But the, less attractive is what I mean, I don't mean attractive. But in the Kantian move, there's something very sensuous that ends up presenting a form of knowledge that is not graspable and not graspable. And this is the sort of the environment for art. Now, next week we're going to meet at 11 o'clock.
Please.
Don't forget. And then that's going to go till 2 o'clock. Then I have a meeting from 2 to 4, that's what it is, and then, or 2 to 3:30, and then Franco is at 3:30. But we're going to try and figure out how we can squeeze everybody in. So if you really can't move this, maybe we have Franco after the PhD, and then.
I don't mind, you don't have to be there.
No, we have to be there.
Is this the research cafe I did last year?
Yeah.
No, of course we got to be there.
We have to be there. I mean, this
Otherwise you're left with the
We will be there.
we're going to be there. I mean, there's no
You're
question
not
about it. It just may be that we have to put a different time up for the poster.
But did not Jacqueline say that it could be rescheduled?
It can't be rescheduled. I'm sure that
They
they're
probably
happy.
can
Doesn't
switch
have
with
a
someone
breakdown.
else. Whoever's
You
next
do.
week, can they just, maybe someone next week is not from from Market Street and it's from somewhere else.
I mean, we
It's somebody they don't care about.
we had somebody very important to us coming to speak to us, so obviously we
Yeah,
need
it's
to
important. That's unfortunate. But I will now have a discussion with various people, try and move things around. I think yours will be the hardest thing to move.
Yeah.
I think that Franco will be less hard, although there's going to be, it's been announced on eFlux. Sorry. We'll figure it out. But we cannot not be there. It's as simple as that. Good. Okay. Thanks.
So next week we read
Oh,
the
sorry.
prolegomena or the continue
And-
with the introduction?
And see if you can actually read the full introduction and the prolegomena. Good. Are you okay with the fact that we're doing Kant? Yeah? Grace?
Now.
You sure? Yeah, good. Good. Bye. Excellent. Wonderful. Sorry I had to run out. There was a bit of a first.